Today we've got something a little bit different and a little bit special. So today's video is going to be all about XRP. Now, I know you guys have been asking a lot about XRP. That's always a popular one in the comments, asking for more XRP astrological videos. But we've got a real special guest on today, and that's Jeff Zylstra from UpTrade. Jeff is CEO of UpTrade. He's got a lot of insight into the XRP community, how things are going from the technical, fundamental standpoint. UpTrade are an excellent brokerage based down under in Australia. So, Jeff, why don't you kind of introduce, yourself and UpTrade and the team, just so our audience can be familiar with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Jeff Zylstra. I'm the founder and CEO of UpTrade. We're a digital asset brokerage based out of Melbourne, Australia. And if we put it simply, we help people grow their wealth through digital asset investments. So, yeah.
So, Jeff, now I know you've been kind of traveling a lot recently, but one of your travels was recently with the XRP conference to be kind of part of that community. Now, how was that for you? How did you find it?
It was excellent, actually. That was over in Tokyo, and I do frequent a lot of different XRP events around the world, and yeah, the feeling, the vibe is very different from any other community. It's definitely a lot better, let's put it that way. And, a lot of very smart investors, family offices, whales, or even just sort of enthusiasts, they tend to go to these things. And I noticed that we tend to have a higher level of intelligent sort of conversation around digital assets. You go to other conferences, other conferences are great, but they kind of feel like a bit of a cesspool of people shilling just anything under the sun.
Yeah.
And, obviously, as we all know, XRP have been building, quietly and recently quite loudly for, acquiring licenses. They've got an ETF, RLUSD. There's just so much to discuss now. And, it's a very, very positive framing. And it's great because you get a chance to meet the XRP team. XRP Sydney, I got to meet Brad Garlinghouse, Monica Long, and got to meet some of their, I think I can't remember his name, the chief commercial officer over in Tokyo as well. So you really get to rub shoulders with people and ask and get the information from the horse's mouth. I find that's really important to demystify the speculation from the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's a really exciting time in the community. And as you say, it's so important to touch base with the people in the physical community so you can get that information and to see what's happening kind of behind the price, so to speak. And I know plenty of people in my audience are very much interested in XRP, just general from the astrology side, from the price-wise side. Now, generally, since 2026 has started, I had a bearish outlook for cryptos, and it's been, tough year so far, certainly for the big players like Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm just looking at the price now. XRP were down, just quite down on the week, down to $1.39. But despite all the price action, there's plenty of stuff happening behind the scenes by the sounds of it. What have you in UpTrade and alongside your team of analysts been seeing price-wise for XRP recently?
Yeah, well, obviously, we've seen a bit of a drawdown in the sort of wider market, and, no coin is resistant to that. We've seen a lot less volatility in XRP, which is great. And, it's no secret that, a vast majority of our clients and our assets under custody is actually XRP. So a lot of those clients are doubling, tripling down on their positions. A lot of XRP investors, they're not tourists, so to speak. They're not here just to make a quick buck and get out. They genuinely believe in the infrastructure, where the project is going, the value of the cryptocurrency, and yeah, it's a great opportunity. It really depends. The more experienced XRP investors, they're looking to acquire more at quite rapid paces. So this is a blessing for a lot of people. A lot of people say this is great positioning. Especially a lot of people who were buying XRP last year. If you can get it for half the price, then look, it's a no-brainer considering where it's going to go. So it's a great opportunity for just for the market to rinse out the tourists, rinse out the paper hands, so to speak. And, as Warren Buffett says, wealth always flows from the impatient to the patient. So, yeah, we're seeing a lot of that this year, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of have the same kind of bias. If 2026 is a very bearish year on crypto, I mean, these are the times to be buying when it's not so popular and the price isn't so attractive, and classic principles of investing, I suppose, as you'd know, 101. Now, because my audience are interested in the astrology side, I am going to quickly fire off some key dates for the members. So let me switch to the astrological chart. A quick explainer for folks who are going to be interested. The chart I'm using for XRP is the 2nd of June, 2012, set for noon in San Francisco. Now, I originally put out an article on Substack where I analyzed about 4 different potential charts for XRP to try and get a sense of how responsive each of those charts were. And after a good testing with about 4 or 5 charts, I came to settle on June the 2nd, 2012 at noon in San Francisco. This one has been more responsive for me than not. And all things financial astrology, we have to remember that we're looking for responsiveness of a chart. The transits in astrology, it's not 100% guaranteed to manifest exactly bearish or bullish, but what we try to find is how responsive is a chart to the time signature, right? To the bearish or bullish time signatures in these assets. For example, one way in which this chart has been responsive in the last year was just around New Year's Eve, going into New Year's time, 2026. We had transiting Uranus conjoining this chart's natal Jupiter here at 27 Taurus. I was quite bullish on that. We did see XRP increase about 25 to 30% just in that first week of New Year's, but it quickly came back down. So that's one of the ways we try to find a level of responsiveness in the chart. So I'm going to fire off some quick dates to be on the lookout. Now, generally, as I've said with Jeff here, I have a general bearish bias for crypto in 2026 and generally the same for XRP. Now, I can give the technical astrological justification as to why. Now, in the short term for 2026, I'm a little bit more bearish for XRP. But as we said, in the long term, I'm very excited for XRP. And we'll get to a specific date in the next few years, which I'm keeping my eye on for XRP, looking very, very bullish. But as we get to the second half of the year, guys, we're getting close to July, second half of the year now. July the 6th, this is the first key date to be looking around this time period. Why is this one kind of bearish? Well, it's because we got K2, transiting K2 here, conjoining the natal ascendant degree of this chart for XRP. Now, as folks might know, K2 is often associated with material loss, reduction in value. It's not a very bullish graha, as they would say in Vedic astrology, a planet, a point. It's not a particularly bullish point to have K2 on the ascendant. This gives a sense of reduction in power, loss, and dispersion. And I've seen K2 hitting the angles on different stocks, such as Meta. I think we saw K2 hitting Meta's midheaven recently, which led to a serious reduction in the price value of Meta. So seeing K2 conjoin the ascendant going into July, for me, gives a kind of bearish stint for XRP. Also because we see transiting Uranus here at 3 degrees Gemini conjoining the natal K2 at 5 degrees Gemini. This gives a kind of surprise sense of shock, a surprise sense of loss. Perhaps there is a loss in value that wasn't quite expected. Again, this is short-term bearish kind of signatures. What I do want to point forward to is as we get into August. Now, August is going to be an important time frame in the macro astrology as I see it for the markets, generally for equities, stocks, crypto, and AI, but also for the wider crypto markets generally. I have quite a bearish slant after July into early August. One thing that we do see is this solar eclipse, which is occurring on August 12th. Now, let me forward the chart to August 12th. Now, it is weird, but there is a pretty good statistically correlated backtesting you can do with solar eclipses, which tend to be pretty bearish on the markets when you look at it in the weeks after those eclipses. But for me, this eclipse, which is happening August 12th at 20 degrees Leo, this is squaring the natal moon. This is a tough aspect. An eclipse is generally bearish, but when it hits a sensitive point in the chart, such as the moon via a square angle, this is generally a bearish short-term signal here. I don't really like much of August. Generally, it looks bearish to me. Now, Jeff, before I head on to the next dates, I don't know if how your analysts are viewing the summer period coming into quarter 4 of this year. I don't know what the the biases are there, if there's any key signals that you're watching out for in July and August going into Q4 of this year.
Yeah. There's a few things we're definitely looking at. Bitcoin was unable to break through its sort of technical resistance at around 82, 83K, and we've dropped down to around 77 now. We are expecting a bit of volatility between sort of 74 to 77, being that we may range and bounce within this area. And obviously, the Clarity Act is either priced in or it seems like it's going to be a bit of a non-event. We're expecting it to essentially serve institutions and not investors. So yeah, we aren't too crazy hot on it at the moment. And everyone's expecting it to be the biggest bullish catalyst of this year. And you know what they say, when most people are running in one direction, you should probably take the contrary opinion, or at least take it into scope. So yeah, we're pretty well aligned with your analysis on XRP in the short term. Unfortunately, it's just part of the market-wide sort of drawdown. There's nothing wrong with XRP. They're still building. There's still huge amounts of value. It will still come out on top. And bearish doesn't mean bad. Bearish means opportunity, right? All markets go up and down and swing and roundabouts and have market cycles and things like this. New investors need to be able to fill up their bags and carry the torch, and older investors need to be able to restructure their portfolios and get better positions. So this is all part of the game. This is nothing new in any industry that's that's around investing. So bearish means opportunity, but it's good to have a bit of an outlook because it helps you sort of strategize. Because if people think that it's bullish, and just they're thinking of most people are investing off feelings. No strategy at all, no astrology, no technicals, no fundamentals. And they just go, I think that it's going to go higher, right? And then they're surprised when they're wrong, right? So it's all, how many green ticks can you get against your strategy, right? If you're looking at the astrology, how much can you validate there, right? And then, you look at other factors as well. How much can be validated for you to make a good choice? And if a lot of things are pointing towards bearish in the short term, that might mean an investor might say, oh, I was going to buy $100,000 of XRP today. Maybe I'll buy 5 and I'm gonna maybe average in till the end of August and achieve a better price. So bearish doesn't mean bad. Bearish means there's a potential for strategy here, so you can get more coins. So because it'll pay off in the future. So that's sort of our opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. It very much depends on the strategy of the people watching, whether they're short-term traders or the long-term investors. And I agree, when we're looking at the astrology, we're not only looking at the astrology. It is important to use whichever layers of technical analysis that you may be using, whether fundamental, technical, cyclical. I like to suggest that astrology is closer to cyclical analysis, if anything, but we should never use anything in isolation. We should always use it as another lens in our toolkit, for sure. And it is, important. It's interesting that you're saying about how people are run by emotions. I'm not sure if you guys have been tracking developments with, prediction markets such as Polymarket and Kalshi. Now, this is an interesting development for me because Polymarket for 2026, Polymarket have a 51% chance right now that XRP hits $1. Now, I'm not saying that Polymarket is infallible. I'm not saying that Kalshi is infallible, but I am quite interested in the role that prediction markets are going to play for us in the future in terms of evaluating the almost infinite sources of information that we have, and especially interesting to use it in conjunction with market analysis. So when I checked on Polymarket, this is where all the people around the world in a giant network are betting their money in terms of putting a bet on where do they think XRP is going to go for 2026. The collated chance out of all of that money going in those prediction markets roughly puts $1 XRP at 51%. And I use this as a sort of lens, and then we're looking at the astrology, which seems to be bearish into the second half of the year, especially this August to October timeframe. I don't know if you guys UpTrade are looking at prediction markets as an analysis tool. I granted they're not perfect. There's lots of manipulation that can happen. They're not a perfect system by any means yet, but I do think it's an interesting development that we're seeing in terms of evaluating information. Are you guys keeping your eye on prediction markets?
Yeah, we do. We do keep our eye on prediction markets, and I think it's a really intelligent tool, right? Because what it's showing you is, before looking at a sentiment, right? Because sentiment is what drives a lot of crypto a lot of the time, right? Obviously, there are fundamentals, there's regulation, there's a lot more, there's ETFs, there's a lot of noise going on, right? But sentiment's still king, right? So if you can get a good temperature of the sentiment and what the general population or public are sort of feeling about something, that is usually a pretty good precursor for what may potentially happen next or what may not happen next, right? Because if you've got too much dumb money, for example, betting that XRP is going to go to $1, then you can say, okay, well that's I need to take the opposite position there. But if you're noticing a trend between institutions or experienced investors that they think it's going to go down, then so it really does sort of. I wouldn't use it as like you said, go on Polymarket, have a look and go, all right, 78% are betting this, I'm going to bet as well. That is probably not enough to make a clear investment or choice. But it definitely gives you the temperature in the room because people are obviously putting a bit of conviction behind it, being their money because they're betting on it. So yeah, I think it's a good sort of surface level, temperature in the room tool to then dive deeper into things like astrology and things like this.
Yeah, I'd agree on that. I think it's a really interesting development for how we kind of evaluate information. And as we said, yeah, there's plenty of flaws with these sites and these platforms, but I think they're going to be growing over the next couple of years, and I think they'll probably play an important role for us in terms of getting a very quick taste of worldwide sentiment or worldwide opinion rather than going through endless articles, analyses, and debates. It can serve as a sort of quick fire taste of where sentiment may be at. Not that it's an infallible tool for sure, but certainly interesting to keep an eye on these things. The next key date, I would argue, is going to be around September when we have this Uranus going retrograde. So I'm putting my mouse over Uranus. It's currently at 5 degrees Gemini. When we have this little red text appear around September 16th, this is the retrograde period. Now, Uranus is quite an important planet in all things financial astrology. You can do some back testing on retrograde periods and direct periods. For me, to boil it down into English, when we saw Uranus entering Gemini for the first time around mid-April, it coincided with this huge rally in the equities market driven by the AI and tech stocks. We go back the last Uranus cycle, 84 years, in the early 40s. Again, that was really bullish for the Dow Jones. So that's only 2 out of 2, but we tend to see a bullish slant when Uranus is in Gemini. Now, despite the Iran war situation and the general bearish sentiment, April onwards, as soon as Uranus was in Gemini, saw a real huge recovery on the equities market. It was taking everyone off by caught them off guard. And what I'm thinking with this retrograde period is that a lot of the speculative froth of the April equities surge could be at risk. Uranus retrograde is all about revising things, reanalyzing things, going over things for another time. All of those words is associated with the retrograde. And this is quite an important punctuation mark in our timeline. Again, it's simply adding a further bearish bias for all things tech, crypto, and AI in this Q4 period as we get from kind of August through October. Speaking of October, it's around the 19th. I don't really like particularly. Again, I don't want to give you guys overly bearish sentiment here, but it's just in the second half of this year, we do have more tougher astrology than pleasant astrology, which can correlate with bullish markets. Around October 19th, let me circle it here, we can see that Venus retrograde, Venus relating to wealth and markets, going through a tougher retrograde period here, but also transiting Pluto at 3 degrees Aquarius. This is not particularly nice. We also see that Chiron is just about opposing Venus here, and Jupiter over on the left-hand side of your screen is conjunct Ketu. This is a tough signature for markets in October, and it kind of adding more confluence to this key theme that this August through October period is going to be quite tough, in my opinion. Now, in terms of that's the short-term argument for me for the next few months for XRP. I do have a bearish bias going towards October, November. However, as we say, that's a short-term issue because, as Jeff was saying, so much with the XRP community is so long-term focused. Now, I don't know on your side, Jeff, you and your team must be looking at the milestones and the achievements that the XRP community is looking forward to a few years down the line, closer to 2027 and 2028. Are there any particularly exciting developments that you see coming in the next few years which could significantly shift the price? Anything that we should be looking forward to with XRP?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's well known that XRP is essentially acquiring every license. I have acquired over 85 licenses in broker dealing and financial services licenses across the globe, right? They are setting the financial framework and infrastructure for as practically as much as possible to be able to run on the XRPL, right? We have seen, we follow the statistics for the ETFs very closely, the Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, XRP ETFs. And XRP, while it hasn't been the largest volume, it has been the one that is quite obviously has the highest conviction. And this is information that everyone can see online. There are hardly any outflow days, right? Mostly inflows, mostly positive. I think there's only been like 2 or 3. And whereas if you look at things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, every day, every second day, it's inflow, outflow, inflow, outflow. It's really hard to understand what's going on there and get a clear sort of vibration from that. But look, at the end of the day, they are positioning themselves for the institutional positioning. They realize that, going up against the banks, I know that crypto for a very long time has been down with the banks, down with the financial institutions. And look, it's great to have that, but the banks are the ones that, and the regulators are the ones that hold all the keys to the kingdom. So now they're sort of shifted their positioning to say, okay, how do we not destroy your system? How do we make it better? How do we make it more efficient, more effective? And if we can serve you as institutions, you will be able to serve your customers better. So it's more of a top-down approach. So, firms like Goldman Sachs, like BlackRock, all these huge firms are increasing their exposure to XRP products. Even UpTrade, we're about to, this hasn't been publicly announced yet, but we're about to implement Ripple Pay into our ecosystem so that clients can use those rails, right? Because they are excellent rails. The RLUSD stablecoin growth is only going to get bigger and bigger. We predict it to be bigger than USDC within the next 12 to 24 months in terms of market share. There's just so much happening, and they're winning on so many battlefields all at once. It all comes to a precipice at some point. And we don't believe the precipice will be this year. We believe it will likely be, the catalysts will all converge likely next year. So Q1, Q2 possibly. So, while XRP is sitting at a major technical level, I invite it to go down to $1. Honestly, I'd love to get more. We'd love to build our treasury out with more XRP and use more of their products. Because at the end of the day, we've seen Ethereum go from 50 cents to several $1,000s. We've seen Bitcoin go from cents to over $100,000, right? And people say, where do you think these coins can go? I'll go, well, if there's a precedent set, if these tokens can go from where they were to where they are now, absolutely. And then there's the argument that, there's so many XRP tokens, the mechanics don't make sense from a market cap perspective. Yeah, at the moment, that's true, but what's to stop XRP from buying, 20, 30, 50% of the supply, burning it? It happens all the time with projects, right? So at the end of the day, Ethereum has an infinite supply. They can create more whenever they like, right? And it's still got up to several $1,000s. And at the end of the day, all people were building was crappy dApps and technology on it, like XRP and the XRPL. They're building the rails for the future. The trillions of dollars that will run on the XRPL, based off, just a small fraction of the SWIFT system that the banks are already testing. It's mind-boggling to comprehend the amount of transactions and numbers and the frameworks that are already being built in place to come. And me being a traditional finance guy, me being, working in crypto at OTC desks and brokerages for the last 10 years, this framework is what we need. So, I see where it's going, and everything's being built towards that. So it's being done in a regulated fashion, a systematic fashion. And it's not smoke and mirrors. They're not making promises. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and pumping money into marketing. It's actually happening.
Yeah, it's amazing what you've been saying there as well, with between Bitcoin and Ethereum and the other big crypto players, that you looking at the data and the inflows and the outflows reveals that the market has the most conviction in XRP by the sounds of it. That's really incredible, and very important points on 2027 and 2028, because that's where I'm looking at as well personally. I mean, for the guys who are interested in the astrology, let's quickly get the chart up. Now, the most positive time frame for me is actually 2028, but we're looking at 2027 as a significant step. Let me put the clock forward to June 2027. And what we'll see in June, around June 22nd, 2027, one of the most positive astrological aspects that's happening here is Uranus, this planet of crypto, technology, AI, revolutionary technologies, liberation, freedom, volatility. It's a very potent archetype in the astrology, is in sextile with the natal Uranus at 7 degrees of Aries in the 8th house. So you're transiting Uranus here in the 10th house of the career, the reputation, the public perception of this asset in a positive flowing harmony with the natal Uranus at 7 Aries. That's pretty potent in terms of how slowly these outer planets move. That's a very rare sextile to have, and it is occurring within this 10th house of the career, the personal success, how people perceive this project. But as Jeff was saying, this is a long-term reward, and for me, the peak kind of potency for me is happening around July 2028. What's happening here is that Uranus is a very slow-moving planet. It takes 7 years to go through each sign. In the sign of Gemini, which is the sign of transaction, trade, communication, getting things from A to B, logistics, transaction, and all things, monetary exchange. It's funny then that is the sign associated with the public perception and career and how this asset is seen. This is XRP's career, if you will. Now, Uranus is at 12 degrees Gemini, and it's conjoining the natal sun. Now, that is a once per 84 year cycle. It's incredibly bullish. Uranus is this hyper volatile, high energy, high potency planet. It moves very slowly through the zodiac. And so when it hits the natal sun at 12 degrees Gemini, this is giving a hell of a lot of power to let's say, the life force, the quote unquote life force. Uranus on sun is undoubtedly pretty much the most bullish transit I can see for the next few years. At the same time, we've got Venus going through the 10th house. We've got Mars conjoining natal Mercury. Pluto at 7 degrees Aquarius is sextiling the natal Uranus at 7 degrees in Aries. And then Neptune is obviously within 1 degree of the natal Uranus. So there's this chart, this signature is getting hit quite really potently during this time. And for me, this is the beauty of astrology, is that it kind of gives you a time frame. It allows you to sort of see where things might be happening in those future years. It kind of gives you a target or a goal to get to, rather than reacting emotionally with your trading and investing in the short term. So folks who are following XRP, I do think 2028 will be the most potent year, but obviously there will be catalysts and things along the way. Now, Jeff, in terms of those, projects and that behind the scenes work and those catalysts over the next few years, which ones are you kind of most excited about? What are UpTrade looking at in terms of the exciting developments for XRP over the next few years?
We believe that the XRPL is going to lead the space in terms of lending on their ledger. The RWA growth is going to be absolutely immense. This is absolutely the next biggest point of difference here. We've already started to see RWA move from speculation. A lot of it the last couple of years was speculation to actual assets being moved and tokenized onto platforms. We think that it's going to be the institutional settlement layer and enterprise blockchain companies will lean on this as well. So some reports sort of claim that the XRPL's RWA ecosystem will probably dominate the space by late 2026/early 2027. So that paves the way for everything, really. At the end of the day, this is 24/7 trading markets. This is 24/7 trading stock markets. This is pre-IPO allocations that are liquid. This is just like it's crazy, right? What can be done with this? And we've already seen what can be done, with people front running the oil trades on the weekends through hyperliquid, right? So there's a huge advantage to have everything trading transparently on a chain. So yeah, we're really excited about the RWA growth that's to come.
It seems that we've got a lot of synergy here with the long-term bullish fundamentals. And of course, I've tried to be balancing the outlook here. I mean, as we said, for 2026, going into Q4 2026, I am more biased towards bearish sentiments. As we've said, this presents good opportunity if you're thinking about the long term and all of the actual fundamental things that are going on behind the scenes with XRP. Now, I've tried to get a balance here for, bullish and bearish, but I'm going to ask a question which is a bit of a devil's advocate question for you, Jeff. So what I want to ask is, what do you think would be the strongest argument against owning XRP, do you think? Devil's advocate question. If we had to come up with the strongest argument against owning it, what would that be?
I guess, with every big venture, with huge amounts of capital and risk and regulation at stake, there is a chance that they may not make it. There is a chance that their banks may betray them and say, all right, thank you for the technology. We now know how it works. We don't need you anymore. There is the potential for that. I find that a lot of the people who are, how can I put it? They don't like XRP, or they don't. It's coming from a lack of knowledge. Okay. We find that a lot of the negative sentiment, a lot of the naysayers and things like this, they're people who could not tell you what it does, and people who cannot tell you what the recent developments have been. And, I've sat down with investors who have had really bearish, negative opinions on XRP, and I've shown them the facts, and then all of a sudden they're evangelists, right? It depends on if we're talking about the difference between people who know and people who don't know. But I'd say that obviously with any huge undertaking, with any worldwide, you're looking to sort of help change a financial system, you're going for the Mount Everest of tasks. So, there's a lot that can go wrong, but in saying that, there's a lot that can go right. So I think the good far outweighs the bad here. They have been very resilient as a company. They've been kicked down, discounted, demonized even, for many times, with the SEC case, that we saw a severe price suppression during 2021, and it just galvanized the community. It just galvanized the ethos towards the common goal. So, setbacks aren't always bad. I think it's a good thing. Everything that's happened to Ripple and XRP to date has built it to what it is today. Super
interesting. Excellent points there as well. And, absolutely, for me, we're in this new kind of industrial revolution. The macro astrology translation of that is we have Uranus in Gemini, 9 trining Pluto in Aquarius. Essentially, in English, this is a new industrial revolution with all things AI, with quantum, with crypto. And it is probably going to be happening over this next 7 years. A chunk of that revolution will be happening over the next 7 years for sure. And there's lots of opportunities there for people who can take advantage of it. I also like your answer there, Jeff, with usually just the fundamental knowledge being the thing that keeps people away or keeps people skeptical of XRP in a certain sense. What would you say that the XRP community kind of fundamentally misunderstands about Ripple's actual business model? If you talk to folks who are really into XRP, but perhaps they don't understand a core function of the business model that actually adds a lot of value, where is the common confusion from a quote unquote retail investor?
Yeah, I'd say that, the industry is, full of a lot of financial words, and it's only becoming kind of more because of, all the regulations, all the licensing, all the institutional things they're doing. So, me coming from traditional finance and working in the digital asset space for a long time, it's pretty sort of easy to get my head around. So I think people can get a bit carried away with buzzwords and what does that mean? And, I think a lot of it does come down to the self-education of it as well. Even just simply just punching in a ChatGPT, what does this mean? What's the good? What's the bad? Trying to sort of break down the institutional lingo. And I feel like that's what we do really well at UpTrade. We not only understand, but we don't want to gatekeep the information. We want to distill it down to its simplest form and produce that to customers so they can get what that means for them as retail or high net worth investors. And sorry, to circle back to one of your other points as well, there's a key point that I absolutely missed, which I'm sure a lot of people were screaming and thinking you missed that point. But the future, I believe, the big future utility, because the XRP ledger's transactional throughput is superior to practically everything else in the space. One key point we missed was AI. When you mentioned it before, it kind of brought it back to the front of mind. AI is not going to have. They're not going to have bank accounts. They're not going to have IDs. They're not going to have trust documents. They're going to be transacting wallet to wallet, AI to AI, like peer to peer essentially in a trustless environment. So how are they going to do that? They're going to be using the fastest and most effective and regulated blockchains in the space. So there's a prediction out there that AI agents will be transacting on behalf of humans at a rate of 1,000-fold in the next 5 years. So wow. Those transactions have to go somewhere, right? And like I said, AI can't walk into a bank and show them an ID and say, I want to open up a savings account and send money to Rowan. No, it's going to be wallet to wallet instant transactions, right? So that's a key element and layer that is going to happen here between the sort of AI and digital asset blockchain economy, the intersection of all of this.
It's amazing to see where things are going with it. And, especially for our audience watching this video, who may be more open-minded to the long-term astrology, but can also see for themselves fundamentally and technically where things may be going, that they may be interested and, can see the long-term potential here with XRP. I really like what you guys are doing. It's a fundamentally refreshing business model. I like the high touch aspect. I like what you're doing for people. I want to give you a bit of a chance to talk about UpTrade and how folks can benefit.
I guess the fundamental core, and if we put aside the service offering and stuff like that, like why do we even exist, right? Exchanges, look, they're great. They're excellent, but we find that when it comes to actual support, if you need help, what I mean is you need help, your account's locked, your funds didn't arrive, your account's been hacked, you've placed a trade by mistake. What are you going to do? There is no recourse. You are fully responsible for the outcome. And look, the reality is a lot of people, they lose their hard-earned dollars. A lot of people grow their wealth for a significant period of time and they don't want to see it disappear and just evaporate, right? When I started investing in crypto over 10 years ago, there were less than 50 coins that were tradable. Really lucky for me, I could just throw a dart at a dartboard and then that token will be up 400% in a day. Low liquidity, very low volume, very small amount of coins. We fast forward to today, there is estimated, and this is the fact, there's over 65 million different token projects out there. How can an investor feasibly grow wealth when they're trading against AI? When they're trading against institutions, family offices, the game has fundamentally changed, right? So, what happens when you have a bit of wealth and you want to invest it? Do you start learning yourself? Maybe if you're retired and you have all the time, but most of our clients have families. Most of our clients have businesses. They're spending and committing time to research, maybe a couple of hours a day when they should be eating their lunch, when they should be spending time with their kids. Right? So our ethos is, why don't you do what you do best, right? And continue to do what you do. And, like a Ferrari, for example, if you have a Ferrari, a nice car, you're going to service it yourself? No, you're going to take it to a professional to handle it. If you have a complicated end of year, end of financial year crypto taxing you need to do, are you going to go through it line by line yourself? No, you're going to get a professional to handle it for you. So we kind of sit in between where the intersection of where people know and where people don't know, right? Because Twitter is, and the usual sources are the worst places to get your information these days. It's the bottom of the pit. You're literally buying everyone else's exit liquidity. So we have institutional grade research. Each client gets assigned a broker, an analyst. They get a strategy. Some clients speak to us every day. Some clients speak to us every quarter. Some clients say, only speak to me when I want to sell, Jeff. That's it. I'm only interested in you getting my millions to my multiple bank accounts around the world, which we specialize in. So it's a it's as much or as little as you want it to be. We have a vast range of services, but it's all about you and your goals and how do we manage the risk and help you get there. And, we help investors who are just getting started. They just want to buy their first crypto. They're not really sure. They've been thinking about it for a while. They're a little bit, I don't really understand the risks. So, and then you've got veteran investors who have seen many cycles, but haven't gotten the value they want from the crypto markets. And then on top of that, we have some really highly successful strategic crypto investors that use certain parts of our service elements to be able to help them with onboarding and offboarding capital. So it really depends on where you are in your journey. But what I'm trying to say is, regardless of where you are, where you sit, you instead of going into battle with a stick, why don't you go into battle with an army, right? With a strategy. We want to move the space forward. We want to protect people and give them great information, give them great relationships, because that's what gets us up in the morning.
And guys, if you are interested, do remember that you can go through my referral link, and I'll put it in the description. And there's many different benefits to going that route. But Jeff, this has been super interesting because I think it's a rare conversation to have with a COO of a brokerage, to take the fundamental and the technical perspective from someone who's been in there with the XRP community, has been to the conferences, knows what's happening on the ground, and to kind of blend it with the astrological. I think this is a very rare resource to have for folks. So it's been a really excellent conversation. And I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on, Rowan. The feelings are mutual. I really appreciate and respect your opinions and your analysis, with the astrological side of financial markets. At the end of the day, it's an important aspect to look at, and whatever edge we can get in this game is always going to be a great way to win. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Oh, well, there you have it, guys. I hope that's been excellent for you XRP fans out there. Any questions or comments, put it in the comment section and I'll try my best to answer them. Apart from that, we'll say see you later, Jeff.